Welcome to the Full Strength Father podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Corper, and founder of Full Strength Father. Today is episode 10, and we're going to discuss the third element of our purpose, which is found in the founding doctrine of Full Strength Father. In previous episodes, I detail the code of the Full Strength Father. In the last two, I've covered the first and second elements of our purpose: lead with integrity and provide with consistency. So the third element of that purpose that we have as fathers is to protect our families at all costs. So I'm going to read this element of our purpose, and then we'll discuss specific pieces of that. So it's my hope that as we go through this discussion and talk about these different things, that you and I can both walk away inspired to more fully live up to this purpose in our lives. So here's what it reads, quote, "My purpose is to protect my family at all costs. I know that I am responsible for their physical and spiritual safety. I am competent in the use of self-defense, first aid, firearms, and fundamental survival skills. I acquire and maintain resources that can be used to keep my family safe in the event of dangerous circumstances. I develop, teach, and maintain emergency plans of action for my family. I am vigilant, informed, and engaged. I know that it is my duty to defend my family both physically and spiritually for the rest of my life." Spiritual protection and physical protection are fundamental in our responsibility as fathers. And in our world today, it's never been more important for us to be vigilant, informed, and engaged in that process of protection. Now, spiritual protection is something that I think is often overlooked in secular society when it comes to the role of a father, but it is absolutely essential. When I think about my life and what I've seen, I'm 35 years old right now. When I graduated high school, it was 2007, and the iPhone was just coming out. I think it was released in 2007. The App Store followed, and then, of course, as we know, over the next 15 years or so, things have just exploded from a technology standpoint. I remember as a kid in high school having a Nokia brick phone, and a BlackBerry was this amazing new piece of technology where you had the little scroll button and you could, navigate things. So my point is that our children or the youth that we're involved with, this rising generation, from a spiritual standpoint, have never been more exposed to things that can be detrimental to their progression and to their spirituality. Because through that device, the technology that they have in their hands, that cell phone, or of course access to the internet, we can access on one end of the spectrum the most inspiring, educational, amazing content, and on the other end of the spectrum we can access the darkest, deepest depths of perversion, and it's just such a powerful tool, and it's an unprecedented time in human history, and we'll get a little bit more into that, but just as I've reflected on this spiritual protection role that I have as a father, I've realized that I have got to be on point with that. So, one of the scriptures that I referenced in a previous episode is found in Ephesians, but I love it so much. Ephesians 6, Paul says, "Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore take unto you the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand." And then he goes on to describe what that armor looks like. That analogy that Paul uses is very fitting for our day, an evil day. That we are in a spiritual war, good versus evil, light versus darkness. And armor is necessary to be able to stand in our current modern world. And as fathers, this image comes to my mind of, with my two young sons, me placing that armor upon them at a young age as they go to battle. There are certain movies that depict young men fighting in war. And those images are in my mind as I see this scripture of myself in this dire situation where we have limited manpower, limited resources against a almost insurmountable foe, innumerable foe, that on the night before the battle, I'm giving my sons that armor, and they're preparing to go out. And I feel like at a younger and younger age, as each year progresses, our kids are required to have that armor and be ready to stand. C.S. Lewis wrote a book called The Screwtape Letters, which I would highly recommend, that relates directly to what we're talking about here. The Screwtape Letters, it's a satirical novel that was written by C.S. Lewis, and it's presented the book is presented as a series of letters from a senior demon named Screwtape to his nephew Wormwood, a junior tempter who is tasked with securing the damnation of a human who is referred to in the book as, quote, the patient. And so through these letters that we read in the Screwtape Letters in this book, Screwtape, the senior demon, is writing to Wormwood, the junior tempter, on the best strategies to use in tempting this patient or this person, and to tempt them away from the virtuous life and towards sin and damnation. So Screwtape advises Wormwood to use various tactics, such as tempting the patient with pleasure, distracting him from prayer or communication with God, and encouraging him to adapt or adopt a cynical or skeptical outlook on the world. And as this correspondence between Screwtape and Wormwood unfolds, it becomes very clear that the patient is struggling with his faith and his desire to live a virtuous life. But despite the circumstances, like his doubt and the temptations and all the things that this junior tempter is exposing him to, the patient ultimately overcomes those demonic influences and embraces his faith, much to the frustration and anger of Screwtape. And so this Screwtape Letters, is a phenomenal commentary on human nature, morality, and the nature of evil. And it's as if you're stepping over the line and you're in the ranks of the enemy, and you can understand the communication that they have between each other. But a quote that I love from the Screwtape Letters that relates to what we're talking about, how with spiritual protection, or protecting our families spiritually as fathers, is this quote. This is Screwtape writing to Wormwood. He says, quote, "Indeed, the safest road to hell is the gradual one, the gentle slope, soft underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signposts." So this is so important for us to understand, that the way that our families will fall spiritually is not going to happen in some huge dramatic instance. If our families are eroded, and if our families fall spiritually, it's through a process of gradual erosion, of a little slip up here, a little setback over there, here a little and there a little, loosening our standards of spirituality, stopping the practices that build our spirituality. It starts with us as fathers. I mean, our divine calling and role is to lead in that protection and be on the offensive versus the defensive when it comes to spirituality. And so that's a check for me, reading that quote and tying it into Ephesians 6, is that I have to be super vigilant of my spirituality. Am I allowing myself as a man to give in to weakness and temptation and those things that are pulling me away? And I also have to realize that the way that evil works in our lives is just a little bit here and there. So vigilance, being aware of ourselves spiritually, is extremely valuable in overcoming that evil, and then ultimately being a protector. So we have to be prepared ourselves first. The book As a Man Thinketh, there's a great quote that I love. It says, quote, "As the physically weak man can make himself strong by careful and patient training, so the man of weak thoughts can make themselves strong by exercising himself in right thinking." The correlation between physical training and strength development and spiritual training and strength development is so powerful to me. I believe that they're very interconnected. That the process of physical strength development, you think about the progressive overload is a strength training principle where we add just a little bit of weight over time and gradually increase the difficulty, and that allows us to become stronger. Well, so it is with things that are spiritual. It's consistent repetition over time and effort that yields the slight increase in strength that will make us ultimately able to carry the burden, lift the weight, withstand the temptation. Now, when we miss training sessions, we miss weeks of training, we start to digress very rapidly. And in sports performance, the traits that you lose most quickly when you don't train them are the traits that exist as far as power expression and speed expression on the high end of that spectrum. So speed and power and all those things start to drop off first, and then the slower, more forceful movements drop off later, or the ability to express that base strength drops off last. So for us spiritually, I liken that to fatherhood, where when we aren't engaged in developing spirituality, that the ability to be quick and responsive to information, truth, and warnings, that quickness diminishes most rapidly when we're not engaged. Yes, we might still have that fundamental belief and faith and spiritual base that's intact, but the responsive element, the quickness, that's necessary in our current world, we start to lose that sensitivity and we're dulled. And then that slowly leads to our falling away and our weakness and darkness. And our family will feel the effects of that. But it's tough because it's not easily identified unless we're really pushing and training. Those who are training at a high level understand that, when you've been training at a high level for a long time physically, you become more and more acutely aware of the difficulty and the challenge of training, and also the reward of training. Those who haven't trained in many years or completely detrained lose touch with that completely. They don't understand it. So it's very similar to our spirituality. So why do I share all of that? Well, spiritual safety is the thing. It's less tangible than the physical safety. Anybody can identify, okay, self-defense, first aid, firearms, survival skills, food storage, like that's all great. I mean, you can contextualize that into the physical world, but spiritual protection is much, much harder to it's much less tangible, right? So that's why I emphasize this so much in my thoughts today, is because at least for me personally, it's something that I need to work on so much is that spiritual protection for my family. So, how do we do that? Like, how can we protect our family spiritually? What are some things that we can do? Some action items we can take. There's a few here that I've thought of. First is to lead by example. That is essential. And we've talked about this in previous episodes, that never asking our family to do something that we wouldn't be willing to do ourselves. So leading by example, and in that example, practicing gratitude. So setting an example of spirituality in our own lives, having a high level of spirituality in pursuit of that growth, in addition to being full of gratitude, will give us this power to be forgiving and to foster community with our family and others, and encourage spiritual exploration and growth. Because we're on that path ourselves, we are way better equipped to help our children and those around us be on that same path. We cannot lead spiritually somebody where we are not willing to go or have not been ourselves. And in Christianity, which is my faith, that is where Christ is the ultimate example of that for us, because he lived a perfect sinless life in every way and performed the atonement for all mankind. His suffering in the Garden of Gethsemane, his crucifixion and his resurrection, and his ministry throughout his life leading to that point, being that perfect example, he is perfectly equipped to guide us and help us on that path ourselves. And so as men, he is the ultimate example for us to follow. And by so doing, we'll be given the power to help guide others to him alongside us, right? And that's the perspective. It's not that we are the ultimate example. It's that we are doing our very, very best to follow his example, and by so doing, naturally draw others to him alongside us. And so for my role as a father with my two sons, that's how I see my role. And I work to continue to see my role, that it's not about me. It's about my relationship with God and how I can draw others to him through that relationship. So that should be empowering, at least it is for me, because what it does is it takes the emphasis off of me and puts my emphasis on God. And because he knows perfectly what my children and what my family is going to face from an evil standpoint, opposition standpoint, darkness standpoint. He knows all of that. He also knows our unique gifts and talents and abilities and strengths. And so if I think that I know all of that, well, then I'm definitely on the path to that's not going to lead me to be the best protector I can possibly be. But if I rely on him and guidance there, then that's where I really win. So I mentioned leading by example and practicing gratitude. Well, those things naturally lead to us encouraging spiritual exploration and independence, fostering forgiveness, and they make us very vigilant when it comes to what we can protect our children, our families from. Negative influences, harmful media, toxic relationships, unhealthy habits, and all those kind of things. So we just become aware of that. And we have it within context because we're in the right place. So one of the things that I think is key in this role as a spiritual protector is the ability to communicate with others, specifically our spouse and our children. We will be greatly hindered in this pursuit of spiritual protection if we don't have open lines of communication. It's just like if you think about on the battlefield, the importance of communications between teams, between different elements of an army. If communication is cut off, then the ability to effectively defend positions or advance is eliminated. That's when chaos reigns. And so in our families is very similar, right? Using that analogy that Paul has of spiritual warfare, armor. Well, part of that is communication. It's an essential component. So my children need to be able to come to me with anything. They need to be able to talk to me about anything without any fear. We need to have an open line of communication. Same thing with my spouse. Okay, so how do we do that? First, I'll share a few things. So first is set aside time. Second is listen actively. Third is to encourage honest expression. Fourth is using I statements. Fifth is to practice empathy. And then sixth is to practice patience. So I'll talk a little bit about each of those 6 areas. So first, setting aside time. This is one of the easiest things to do, is because it's a scheduling thing and it's a priorities thing. So if you look at your screen time on your phone and you have a few hours a week or more than that, you realize, okay, I've got some time because I'm spending X amount of minutes or hours on my phone. Those minutes should not necessarily be allocated to that. Granted, you need to use your phone for your work, etc. But what I'm saying is that we need to be aware of our time and how we're allocating that, because a key element of being a spiritual protector is to set aside time to be with the ones that we need to protect, to communicate with them. This doesn't mean that it's like this sit down interview, right? It's just, let's go do something together. Let's talk. My father modeled that for me growing up. We would always we'd go on drives. He's a pilot and loves to fly a small aircraft, and we used to go fly together. And sometimes we wouldn't talk about anything like deep or relating to my spiritual well-being, but the fact that we spent that time together created space for me to just be with him, connect, and then feel comfortable talking with him when the time arose. So there was those spaces. In our world today that's moving so fast with all the communication, all the information, all the notifications, all the distractions, that space that we can create actively away from that is sacred. So maybe it's you go hunting with your kid. Maybe you go fishing. Maybe you go ride bikes, whatever it might be. Same thing with your spouse. That space is precious. So that's the first thing. Second, listening actively. This is where you give full attention. This happens, of course, in that time we set aside, but it also happens in these moments throughout the day. What I've noticed, I've been really, really exerting effort right now to not have my device out, my phone out when I'm around my sons. And it's a work in progress, obviously. But gosh, I just realize the more I work on it, how many small, simple opportunities there are for me to listen actively that I may have missed because I was checking a notification or I was on social media or, I was just distracted. So referring back to what I've talked about in previous episodes with the attention economy, we've got to realize that we are exposed to this whole economy that exists to capture our attention. And that attention, what I'm saying is that attention is a precious resource that we can allocate to those that we are called to spiritually protect. So think about that. Asking questions, making eye contact, being near them, being engaged. How active are we listening to our family members? So third is encouraging honest expression. So creating a safe space for our families to speak without judgment or retribution, not being reactive or emotional to the things that are talked about, and being open ourselves is key. The fourth is using I statements such as I feel or I think can help us express our feelings and opinions in a way that doesn't come across as judgmental. So I think this, or I feel that this might be, right? So we're using those sort of phrases instead of you need to X, or just that dictatorial type of communication. This models great communication, and that's what we want to do. Fifth is practicing empathy. What does that mean? Well, that means that we're trying to put ourselves in their shoes as we talk to them. What's their perspective and feelings based on their life experience? And with young kids, a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, it's so easy for me to look at what they're doing through my lens of a 35-year-old man. And that leads to frustration because I'm like, why would you do that? Why would you take that pen and jam it into the drywall? And then why would you saw this? Or like with my boys, it's often physical destruction that we're talking about, right? So those are the things that come to my mind first. Or why would you, pull that away from your brother, whatever it might be. I'm looking at it through my life's experience at 35 years old, and I'm saying, it's obvious why you wouldn't do that. But then empathy is where before I react, I think about, okay, he's 2 years old. He probably just wants to see what that pen's going to do on the wall. Like he's thinking about just drawing, and it just shifts everything. And I think that trait of empathy as a father is a very, very important element of being a spiritual protector, because it keeps us from reacting in a way that's going to shut down communication, and it creates a reaction that opens communication. And you think about referring back to my description of Christ as an example for men. He practiced perfect empathy throughout his life, and the stories of that empathy are very, very descriptive, and there are many of them in Scripture. So that's an amazing place to look to learn about what empathy looks like. 6 is be patient. So patience is we have that long horizon view of what we're doing with our children, with our spouse. We're looking at years. We're not looking at just in the moment. Now we're in the moment, but we're also remembering that larger perspective, and we're being patient in that process. So you might I think about this right now as I'm describing all of this. I'm like, oh my gosh, there are so many things that I need to work on that with what I'm sharing. And it can be easy to get frustrated with the fact that we may not be where we want to be, or we look back at where we were, and sometimes we can regret decisions that we made or how we acted and those kind of things. But patience is accounting for all of that, but then giving ourselves room to improve and be positive about that improvement and be patient in the process of that improvement, and not giving up. Not giving up. Uh, I think of parents that I know that are more advanced in the process than me, that have had kids who have gone off the path, wayward, made really poor life decisions. And I've watched as these parents have exemplified patience throughout the ups and downs of that child or spouse, and stayed the course. And that's led to a reconciliation, and that's led to them coming back together years later. So that should be our perspective on the whole thing. Is it's a long-term process, right? So those are 6 areas that really will open up lines of communication rather than shutting them down. Again, in summary, setting aside time, listening actively, encouraging honest expression, using the I statements, I feel, I think, practicing empathy, and then being patient in that process. Okay, so spiritual safety. I've talked about that. I encourage you to think about the insights that I've shared, and hopefully take some away that you can apply in your life to be a stronger influence from a spiritual standpoint. The big takeaway for me is that I need to sharpen my sword and take on that armor myself every single day at a higher level, so that I can be more present and more engaged to do that for my children. I can't protect them if I'm not able to protect myself first. And so that's my big insight from that piece of the discussion. Okay, so next is I'm competent in the use of self-defense, first aid, firearms, and fundamental survival skills. I acquire and maintain resources that can be used to keep my family safe in the event of dangerous circumstances. So these are the physical elements of protection. Self-defense, first aid, firearms, and fundamental survival skills. These are skills that are being less and less utilized, I think, by the public in general, especially when it comes to like first aid, firearms, survival skills, just being self-reliant. So think about what are some things that you might be able to do when it comes to self-defense, first aid, firearms, and survival skills. That what are some things that you can improve on there? Where are some holes, maybe some weaknesses that you might have that you can shore up? And maybe what are you really good at? And then second to that, ask yourself, do I know any men or families in my life that are good at this certain thing, like firearms or self-defense? And how can I connect with them and learn from them? So that's something that I think about as I read this is, okay, here are some weaknesses that I can improve, and how can I build this into my routine? So acquiring and maintaining resources that can be used to keep our family safe in the event of dangerous circumstances. The first thing that comes to my mind is food, water, just making sure that we have the basic essentials, that if we need to stay in our home during some sort of event, that we can have the resources necessary to stay there for a period of time. We also need to make sure that we have resources available if we need to leave quickly and get somewhere. So having all those things laid out is important. Make sure that you have the basic essential elements that are going to keep your family safe from a physical standpoint. So shelter, water, food, first aid, basic tools, knife, axe, saws, those kind of things if you need to build shelter, fire starting tools, clothing, communication devices, navigation tools, and personal hygiene are all areas that should be looked at when it comes to being ready for any dangerous circumstances that arise. So we then move to developing and teaching and maintaining emergency plans of action for our families. So does your family know what they're going to do in a certain situation? And can they articulate that to you? Do you have plans of action that connect with other families or other resources in the area in the event of a dangerous circumstance or something that happens. So those are important things to think about. Make sure that you understand what are common situations that could happen, and then what is our plan. And so we need to develop those plans, and then we need to make sure that we're teaching and maintaining those plans with our families, because it's great if we come up with a plan, but if we don't refresh it and make sure that our family's on the same page, when that event might happen, we may not be ready. So it's important to have that in place. Very tactical things, like the physical side of this protection is very tactical in nature. It's very much, here are the things that we need to do, here are the resources that we need to have, and just making sure that they're in place. So being vigilant, informed, and engaged. That's the next sentence. I'm vigilant, informed, and engaged. I talked a lot about that when it came to spiritual preparation, and it's equally as important with physical preparation or protection. Physical protection. We need to know what's going on in the world. We don't have to be doom scrolling, right? Just like focusing on that all the time. But it's incumbent on us as fathers to know what's going on in the world and how that can potentially affect our families so that we're ready for that. Being engaged is just making sure that we're looking and communicating. We're looking at and communicating with others around us when it comes to these sort of circumstances. Okay. So, and what's powerful about this whole subject is that the spiritual and physical are symbolic of one another. So all those tactical, physical things that we're talking about are very symbolic when it comes to the spiritual side of things. They connect. And being physically prepared and ready will allow us to be more present in the spiritual protection of our families as well. And finally, I know that it is my duty to defend my family both physically and spiritually for the rest of my life. And I love that phrase is at the end of this third element, this final element of our purpose, the rest of my life. I've been thinking about it it was weird. I was in and out of sleep last night. I was thinking about this phrase just kept coming to my mind, which was, there are no days off. The phrase, no days off, kept coming to my mind. And as I read this, I realize that that's the connection, is that this is my duty as a father for the rest of my life. And I don't get weekends off from that duty. I don't get holidays off. That duty, that responsibility, that purpose is a continuum, a constant. It is by nature daily and required of me daily for the rest of my life. Whether or not I live to that and take that on is a whole nother question. But that helps me reframe my mindset as a father and say that through ups and downs, through darkness, through light, through challenge, and through success, that is my constant purpose. And there can be periods of deep challenge, like I expressed in previous episodes, where I talked about the origin story of Full Strength Father and how this came about. There can be those periods, and there can be periods of recovery and rejuvenation, but the purpose doesn't change. The purpose is constant. The purpose is always there. My purpose, my duty is always there. There is no hiding from it. So we better accept it. And with that acceptance, take it upon ourselves as a mantle and rise up to that and move forward with confidence and courage and be the example that our families need. Be the example that our spouses and our children can rely on for consistent leadership, for consistent love, consistent integrity, provision, and protection. All of those things we can be if we really take this purpose and make it real and make it ours for life every single day. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I'm looking forward to continuing this podcast and building the movement of Full Strength Father. Until we speak again, live full strength or die.